Don't hold on to someone who's leaving, otherwise you won't meet the one who's coming. Carl Jung.
Sometimes, we don't realize how tightly we're holding on until our hands start to bleed. That was me, grasping the remnants of someone already halfway out the door, convincing myself that if I held on just a little longer, they might turn back. I called it love, but looking back, it was fear in a wedding dress. It was silence disguised as hope. I used to think that letting go meant losing something precious. But the truth is, the moment I stopped clutching what was already falling apart, I discovered what I had really been losing was myself. People don't always leave suddenly. Sometimes, they disappear over time, one conversation at a time, one distant look at a time. You feel it. You just pretend not to, because the ending feels unbearable, and the empty space it leaves behind? Terrifying. But here's what no one tells you. That empty space is sacred. It's not a void. It's a doorway. I thought if I just tried harder, gave more, became smaller, I could make them stay. But love that must be earned through sacrifice isn't love. It's a performance. And I was exhausted from the applause I never received. This is not a story about heartbreak. It's about awakening. About the moment you realize that the pain of holding on is heavier than the grief of letting go. That staying attached to what's leaving doesn't keep you safe, it keeps you stuck. And when I finally released them, I wasn't left empty. I was left with space. Space for healing, for breath, for becoming. She lived inside a house that remembered everything. The walls didn't speak, but they echoed. Names once whispered in the dark, promises sewn into the curtains, laughter that had faded into the wallpaper. She wandered its halls like a ghost of her own story, dusting off memories as if they were sacred relics, afraid to disturb them, yet unable to leave. Every room was a season. Summer in the bedroom where they used to sleep, autumn in the kitchen where the silence grew cold, winter in the doorway where he last turned his back. She kept the front door unlocked, not because she believed he'd return, but because she didn't know how to close it. She talked to the photographs like they were still listening. And when night came, she'd sit at the window, not watching for him exactly, but watching the idea of him, as if memory itself might walk back up the road. But the truth was, he had already left long before he physically walked away. And the house, that house, was not a sanctuary. It was a shrine, a monument to what never truly lived, yet still refused to die. There was a hallway she never entered. At the end of it, a door. One she had boarded up with years of denial, old journals, and unanswered questions. It rattled sometimes, especially on the nights when the wind howled and her chest felt hollow, as if something on the other side was asking to be seen. She never opened it. Not yet, because to do so would mean abandoning the comfort of her ruins and stepping into something far more terrifying than loss, the possibility of something new. The door had been waiting for years, not passively, but with a quiet hum, like a heartbeat behind drywall. Some nights, she heard it whisper her name, not out loud, but in that inner voice she had trained herself to ignore. The one that didn't ask for love, but for truth. It wasn't a door made of wood. It was made of every goodbye she had never said, every feeling she had swallowed whole, every version of herself she abandoned for someone else's comfort. She would walk past it, eyes averted, pretending not to notice the way the air thickened in its presence. But the door noticed her. It knew her scent, her steps, her stillness. It waited, not because it was patient, but because it knew that pain eventually becomes too loud to ignore. And one day she stopped. The air that day was different, sharp, almost electric, like something had finally unraveled inside her. Not broken, but released. She stood in front of the door, hands trembling, not from fear, but from recognition. To open it would mean letting go of the ghost she had nurtured, the one she mistook for love, the one she fed with memories kept warm with nostalgia. But the lock wasn't even locked. It never had been. All it took was a breath, a single breath of surrender. The door creaked. Light spilled through, not golden, not divine, but honest. Inside wasn't a person waiting. There was no one coming to save her. What she found was a mirror, and in its reflection stood a version of her she hadn't seen in years, unapologetic, unafraid, and finally unoccupied. She didn't step back from the mirror. She stepped into it. And what she saw wasn't the woman she had shown to the world. Not the smiling mask she wore to seem healed. Not the version that friends praised for being so strong. No, the woman in the mirror looked weathered, but not weak. She looked hollowed out, but not empty. She looked real. There were shadows beneath her eyes, not from sleeplessness, but from years spent carrying other people's absences. And in her posture, a slight lean forward, was the hunger of someone finally ready to stop waiting and start becoming. The mirror didn't offer flattery. It offered reflection. And in that reflection, she saw all the ways she had made herself smaller, to fit into the outline of someone else's affection. She remembered the nights she rehearsed silence instead of speaking her needs. The way she mistook being chosen for being loved. The way she clung to a person not because they were her future, but because she hadn't yet made peace with her past. And the mirror, cold as it was honest, showed her something else. He was never the one who was leaving. He had left long ago. She was the one who stayed. Not because it was right, but because letting go felt like death. But now, looking into her own eyes, she realized something essential. She hadn't died. She had been waiting. Not for a man. Not for a sign. For herself. And she was finally arriving. She stepped away from the mirror. Not as someone fixed, but as someone finally willing to face what was broken. The house around her hadn't changed. The room still held echoes. The old photographs still hung crooked on the walls. But something inside her had shifted. The silence that once screamed now felt sacred. It was no longer a void begging to be filled. It was a space, wide, still, and holy, waiting to be honored. She sat down on the floor. No music, no distractions. Just breath. Just the ache of letting go. And the strange peace that follows when you stop arguing with reality. There were no epiphanies that day. No sudden burst of joy. No magical arrival of someone new at the doorstep. Only a deep knowing that real love was never going to arrive while her hands were still full of the past. And in that knowing, something softened. She saw that the pain had not been a punishment. It had been a teacher. That grief had not been a cage. It had been a key. Not to bring someone else back, but to open the door to herself. She began to move through the house differently, not as a prisoner of memory, but as the architect of what comes next. And the moment she stopped trying to fill the emptiness was the moment she discovered it wasn't empty at all. It was pregnant with possibility, with clarity, with a presence that had been waiting, quietly, patiently, for her to return. Carl Jung once wrote, "What you resist not only persists, but grows in size." And perhaps that's what happens when we cling to those who are already walking away. We resist their departure so fiercely. We inflate their absence into something larger than the relationship ever was. We turn them into myth, into meaning, into proof that we were once wanted, even if only briefly. But what if letting go is not rejection? What if it's release? Not of them, but of the illusion we wove around them. We don't just grieve people. We grieve the story we told ourselves about what they meant. We grieve the version of us that existed when they were still around. The version who didn't yet know the weight of silence, the sting of abandonment, the quiet humiliation of begging without using words. But that grief is not your enemy. It is in truth your initiation. Because letting go is not about forgetting. It's about no longer assigning meaning to something that no longer belongs to your becoming. When you hold on to someone who's already leaving, you're not preserving love. You're interrupting your own becoming. You're gripping a shadow, while the light that wants to meet you waits at the edge of your release. The one who's meant to arrive doesn't knock on a heart still barricaded by memory. They wait, not outside you, but inside the version of you who finally makes space. There's a truth most people are too afraid to speak. We don't fear loneliness. We fear the space that loneliness opens up, because in that space, we are finally forced to meet ourselves. But that space is exactly where the one who is meant for you will arrive. Not just a person, but an experience, a truth, a calling. Something or someone that vibrates with the frequency of your healed self, not your wounded one. The tragedy is this: most people miss what's coming because they're still bargaining with what's already left. They keep the door open out of loyalty to a ghost. They call it love. But love doesn't grip. Love doesn't haunt. Love doesn't say, "I'll only stay if you shrink to fit me." The one who's coming, they won't ask you to beg. They won't require you to bleed to feel worthy. They won't enter through the back door of your life just to sit in the shadows of someone else's memory. They are waiting for you, but not the version of you who's afraid to let go. They're waiting for the version of you who dares to become empty so that something true can finally take root. The door was never locked, but it was never supposed to open for someone who was walking away. Let them leave, because if they were meant to stay, they wouldn't have needed to be held onto. Sometimes I still dream. There are nights I walk the old streets in my mind, pass by the door I used to leave unlocked, and glance at the window where I waited, not for them, but for the hope that someday they'd return with different eyes. But I no longer sit there. I've learned that love is not a cage we decorate with memory. It's a wind that moves through us. And when it's meant to stay, it stays without gripping, without hiding, without needing to be chased. I used to think that losing someone meant losing part of myself. But the truth is, I only lost the version of me that was built on fear. The one who clung out of habit. The one who confused sacrifice for connection. The one who stayed when her soul was already asking to leave. Now I keep that door closed. Not because I'm bitter, but because I'm building something sacred on the other side. And I've learned something simple, and devastating, and freeing. You cannot receive what is meant for you, with arms still wrapped around what has already gone. Let them leave. Let the ache rise. Let the silence fall heavy, because in that silence, if you listen closely enough, you'll hear something arriving, not with noise, not with drama, but with quiet certainty. And when it does, you'll finally understand why the goodbye had to come first.